So it came out when I was 11, and I actually didn't even start watching it until I was about 16. So it came out when I was 11. I didn't really know much about it because I was just like, okay, it's medieval. I don't really care that much. But then someone told me, yo, it's so good, it's so great. I was like, okay, whatever. And when I saw that first episode, I was like, damn, it's good.
My connection to Game of Thrones is very new. I took a long time to get around to see it, and I had this idea for a movie. I was like, I would love Peter Dinklage to be in this film, and my roommate was like, well, then you have to watch Game of Thrones. You just have to see him do it. I was like, fine. And I watched it, and sooner than later, I was on season 7. Yeah, it was amazing.
My connection to Game of Thrones is I basically am a premium cable junkie, snob. HBO marketed something, HBO orders something, a series, and I'll give it a try. And the trailer was incredible. I remember Sopranos in the 90s, and ever since then, I watch anything on HBO. And then I saw the first episode, and I was sucked. And I hadn't even heard of the books. I'm not a fantasy or sci-fi or anything kind of person, but the characters, the execution, it was just another fantastic HBO show. So I was hooked right then.
Very much so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is it that clear? It doesn't matter because it's so fun to watch, but no, at this point you don't even realize that it's a whole world, it's a planet, there's continents and languages and religions that are all made up. You don't even realize. Because everything at the beginning, the White Walkers, you don't even know what that is. All you know is that everyone doesn't believe that it's real. So all you know is that you want to watch more.
I think for me, having seen it so recently and now watching it again, seeing all the foreshadow, that's when I'm like, oh, that's what that meant, And so having seen it, yes, it's very clear where it's gonna, I'm like, oh, I totally see where it's gonna go. But for a person who's seeing it for the first time, or just an average audience member, someone who doesn't critique film or whatever, I could see why it could be very confusing, I
think they very, very well show character in a way that I don't think any other series does. You see all these just random characters just put in this place. They actually make you care for each and every single one of them to the point where you want to see where each person's arc takes them. And I think that what makes it so genius is the fact that they're able to take these characters, their flaws, their strengths, and kind of weave them together in and out to create tension. And I noticed that as you continue to watch the show, it gets better and better. Tension rises, characters change, and they do that to the point where, by the seventh season, there's it's drastically different. Watching back, like you said, so much foreshadowing. I'm just like, wow, there's so much work put into it. I appreciate all of that.
You know that they're going south, and you know that it's going to have to do with the kingdom and the throne, but you have no idea what's coming.
No idea.
Right? No, yeah, you don't. No, but they plant a lot of really nice Easter eggs, I think. Yeah.
Dragon eggs.
Dragon eggs. There we go.
Human emotion. One of my screenwriting teachers, he always told me that one of the ways to create compassion and sympathy for a character is emotional honesty. So even though this is an entirely different time period with entirely different morals and traditions, they have a really good way of making us feel for a character, whether it be somebody who's down on their luck, somebody who is in an impressive
bastard.
That too, somebody who's trying to find strength. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. Daenerys. Is that
Daenerys.
Yeah. I mean, just her character. You can just see they make it very evident, the intricacies of each character. And for that, you feel for them because not because you're in their situation, but you understand where they're coming from. So it's not just people talking the entire time.
Technically speaking, the first scene you see 3 guys riding up to this going north of the wall, and you have one character who is a chauvinistic kind of guy, and then you have this other character who is essentially in this moment the conduit for the audience, and then this other character who doesn't say a lot, but is the older of the three. And they do an incredible job technically creating a contrast between the older one and then the arrogant one. Now, when the arrogant one dies, that's our first, in 5 minutes, our first like relief, right? In 5 minutes, they crafted this, our first sense of relief. And then you see the older of the three die. And now it's our first heartbreak. That quick, because they created the contrast that fast. You see one you hate and one you feel for, and you know whose side you should be on, and then they wipe them both out, and you're like, in 2 seconds, yes, and ah. So I think that's why they're really good at creating technically contrasting characters, ones that will fight the other.
That really applies to the children too. Every single one of the Stark children is completely distinct from each other, and that's something that you mess up when you first start writing, and when you do characters that are close to each other. They have a lot in common, and all these characters are incredibly distinct, and the inner conflict is also really big. Ned Stark, that one great scene where he's thinking about whether to take the job at the Hand of the King, and Catelyn's there discouraging them, and Maester Luwin is there saying that was a different time and everything. Yeah. Great inner conflict, and the gravitas of the characters is also incredible. Jaime Lannister and the King, and Peter Dinklage's character Tyrion, the great gravitas, really distinct, and a lot of inner conflict. So the characters are just great like that. And then think of all the things that you don't see coming. There's a really brief scene of the Hound in there talking with Tyrion, and you have no idea the incredible arc that character is going to be going on. And 7 years later, he's going to be one of the most complex and interesting characters, I think, in television history.
But you know that when you say that, leading off of that, you see when the king arrives into the town and the family standing there welcoming the king, you see a shot of the Hound riding, and they cut to a shot of Arya, almost in admiration, looking at him.
Right.
And then we know where that goes.
Right, and there's all this tension built up as the king approaches, and he's just like, he got fat, and the air is taken out of the whole thing. Right. And also in the feast, you know, such a relatable moment. There's a couple people like hanging outside of the feast, and it's like when you go home for Thanksgiving, and it's like the uncle and the cousin are outside smoking cigarettes. Like, I needed to get out of there for a second, and it's such a relatable. It finds a way to be relatable at the same time. It's complete fantasy, but it's also. That's incredible character work that they do. The best.
I think that's like the true genius of Game of Thrones, because you get this time period where people were truly misogynistic and just like hateful and everything, and you're able to add humanity to them, to the characters. Because I particularly remember hearing when certain characters died, people were kind of mad about that, people were sad about that, and made me think like, okay, you're able to create compassion for characters that you know are by some means flawed. By some means flawed in ways that we probably wouldn't accept today. But that's the magic of storytelling. And I think that they did that almost perfectly, to be honest.
Ned Stark cuts the head off of a little boy that he's never met before, and you still feel sympathy for him somehow. Now that's tough.
Right.
Definitely
very high concept.
Very much
very high concept.
You can see all of the symbolisms and everything that's within the show even from the first episode. And you know, since they have 7 seasons currently, they expound upon it each and every single time. There's so much work put into this that when you do see, it's like this moment of euphoria, because you're like, oh my God, I didn't realize this. You know. So again, I love the fact that they do all that.
My understanding of high concept is like The Hangover, something that's very simple and instantly gets you to want to see it. So maybe I've always been confused about what high concept means. I don't think this is high concept, but I don't think it has the burden of being high concept because it's based on very popular books. So it already has an audience built in. I could be wrong about this, but it's not easy to explain to someone at all. You have to. It's one of those things like you have to just watch it, and you have to watch it a while, because you could see the pilot and also be like, this seems confusing. I'm not really sure. It's going to be some political intrigue show set in some fantasy world, but I don't know. I think my understanding of high concept is it's really easy to pitch. and convey and explain. And I don't think that's what this is at all. It's hard to compare this to just about any other show that's out there.
So when we say high concept, can we talk about what we mean when we say it, so that way we can have a little more clarity?
I have understood high concept to mean something you could pitch in an elevator, in a short elevator ride where the other person instantly knows what you're talking about.
All right, I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was thinking high concept was like there's dragons and death and killing and pillaging and magic and all this stuff, and so and it's a very expensive show to make. So
High budget concept.
High budget concept, right? So yeah, I never heard that term high concept as far as like something you can pitch quick. That makes sense.
So using pitch quick. I believe it was, what was it, 9 families fight for the Iron Throne. I believe that's kind of the gist of it.
Yeah, but even so, if you told me, yeah, it's a show about 9 families fighting for an Iron Throne, that wouldn't hook me.
Iron Throne?
That wouldn't
What's
hook
that?
me,
What's
right?
an Iron Throne?
You know?
I mean, fighting in the medieval times sounds pretty dope to me.
Yeah.
How would you are you saying that high concept is based mostly on how quickly you can pitch it? Because a good portion of films, I'm sure, I mean, pitching is subjective, so I'm sure the way I pitch something would be different than the way somebody else pitches something, but I don't think that would take away its conceptual value, would it?
Again, I keep coming back to The Hangover as an example because that's how this was really explained to me where it made sense. If I said I'm writing a movie about 4 guys celebrating a bachelor party in Vegas, they wake up the next day and the groom is missing and there's a tiger in the bathroom and a newborn baby in the closet and they got to go find their friends, you'd be like, oh, okay, and you would get, oh, that's what the movie is about. You can imagine it just like that in a matter of minutes. But this, I don't know. I don't think it's easy to explain to anyone. Even if you said 9 families going for an Iron Throne, they'd be like, what?
Right.
Uh-huh.
That's a tough one.
I feel as though it's very self-explanatory in the way it's portrayed. You know. Then again, I think that is a subjective thing. You know, when you just told me how Hangover sounded, I immediately thought it was gonna be. It was like a super boring, stoner film. Don't get me wrong, I love The Hangover, I did, but when you had explained it like that, I was kind of like, oh, okay, a series of events happening. But I feel as though when you talk about high concept things, I think of the amount of creativity, work, and originality put into a story. So while Hangover is very creative, I think it also is high concept. I just don't put it to how quickly you can pitch it because, quite frankly, pitching is very subjective across the entire board. And a pitch I can make Star Wars sound amazing, but in the same sentence, I can make it sound terrible just by the pitch. So I don't necessarily think that high concept is based upon how quickly or what you say when you pitch it necessarily.
I think it's an overrated concept anyway. High concept is not something that you really need to think about. Just write a page-turning story.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Creativity.
Okay, I'm gonna lead off with this one.
Oh,
okay,
you, bro.
So, being introduced to this world, right? We automatically get a sense of where we're at, and they have to do this really fast because the show's huge, right? So they have to hook us as fast as they can, and you see the gate rise, and you see this guy's eyes, and then you see his face, and you see 3 guys on horseback lead out to this dire winter wilderness, right? And they're showing cuts of the land, and we have no idea what they're doing, right? And suddenly we see a bunch of severed body parts in a very specific formation, and they blame it on a group of people called the Wildlings. So now we're cued in. Okay, there's a group we need to look out for, and there's a bunch of dead bodies. Now that's not the hook. The hook was when they went back and the bodies were gone.
Yeah.
Now that's where I'm like,
what?
Okay, what just happened, and where do we go from here? And suddenly we see where these bodies are and come from, and then death occurs. And that is when I was like, okay, I'm in, because things are moving. Things are moving now. So that's what I felt.
I love writing openings. It's the favorite part of the pilot. It's natural habitat. It's, before anything happens to anyone, you just get to show your protagonist, not in this case protagonist, but to show them just a day in the life, as if there was just a camera sitting there. And this is really great because you just don't know what's going on. There's so much mystery, but you know it's important because they showed it in the opening. And also, when they show all these enemies, the Starks and the Lannisters, one thing they both have in common is they both think the White Walkers have been gone for thousands of years. So every single time they're referenced, or every single time you go back to the wall, beyond the wall, or at the Night's Watch, there's all this potential energy building that you know is eventually gonna explode onto the scene. But no one realizes that these guys are back after thousands of years. There's monsters up there. Everything else is very relatable. It's people, it's politics, everything south of the wall. And there's this cold, snowy world, and there's monsters are back, and they're eventually going to come. Right. And that's potential energy being just built up that you just, oh my God, when are they going to find out about these monsters? What's gonna happen when they do? And also this beautiful atmospheric first 60 seconds, they utilized where they were shooting and took full advantage of it. Yeah. And there's no talking, and they get all these beautiful tracking shots of them walking through the woods with the perfect gentle snowfall, and you're just wondering. Cinematography is incredible. And
it's so funny because they introduced the wildlings like that, and then we are introduced to an even greater threat in the first 10 minutes, like you said, and then no idea where they're going, and then we're at where we're at now. It's crazy.
Yeah, and Ned Stark is the Lord, and he knows everything, but he thinks they're extinct.
Right.
They did very good with the aesthetic. I truly felt the contrasting tones, not just from the opening shot, just like from everywhere. From being in the forest, the snowy forest with the fog and everything, you could feel that they were in a daunting setting. When you see Daenerys, I keep saying her name wrong. I feel like
Daenerys.
But it has a very warm, inviting tone to it. Each and every single section has its own vibe to it, and I feel like those pictures are worth 1,000 words. You know what I'm saying? Again, they don't need much dialogue. I already kind of understood the context going in from the first shot because you can feel it. You can feel it from the gate raising up. You can feel it from all the shots that they have, and they took a lot of time to be very meticulous with how they communicate their story.
Starts so many questions, though. The little girl too is a huge part of that. So not only did they kill the little girl, then she's alive again, and now you're like, I have so many more questions to ask you than I have answered. It's just you're like, what the hell are these things? There's no reference point to any other movie or story. The White Walkers aren't just like any other. There's no one to compare them to.
They put you on the level of the characters, as opposed to putting you in this sort of, I could say, high perspective, omniscient perspective, if that makes sense. They put you on the same level of the characters, as in just as much as they do. And you're as terrified as they are because it's a force that they never seen.
I would say we're more terrified.
Because
probably. We know something they don't know.
Something that's about to happen. Yeah, and it's because of that in just this first episode, they set the stage. They ask us a million questions, and for each of those questions, we want to know the answer. And they provide stakes that if those questions aren't answered, bad things happen. They did that very well.
I think there's a great complacency they put into the characters as well with the White Walkers. It's like the White Walkers have been dead for thousands of years. Like, what are you freaking out about? Like, why do you care? And we just saw them 2 minutes ago. And they're just like, don't sweat it, guys. And we are for them, right?
That's the thing about that title, Winter is Coming. It's a looming threat that they've set up that's approaching slowly. And as time progresses, along with the other conflicts, they set that up to where now we know that that's coming. So everything that's happening also has this other looming, very dangerous threat that's surrounding them, essentially.
I guess to us, it's always really meant to be the White Walkers are coming.
Yeah,
and that's what that means. And I guess it's clever because we know what they're talking about. Like when he says that, when Ned Stark says winter is coming, he might be worried about snow, but we know what's really coming because we just saw those monsters. It was an awesome opening.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about that is that even in just that opening with just those few scenes right there, they set up the entire series conflict that we feel coming through every single episode. You know, so that, I think that was, not only was that well done, but they like, it was very strong, a very strong enemy that didn't feel like it was just one force isolated. It felt like something that was looming throughout the entire series.
I think,
that
yeah,
you feel.
I think it's what's interesting about that is we get introduced to them so quickly, and then throughout the rest of the series, we get very focused on Cersei and what her goals are, and then we get focused on the wars and the battles, and the White Walkers are always just sitting in the back of our heads, but we cannot forget about the Viper's kiss, you know, the Serpent's kiss or whatever. We can't. So the writers cloud our judgment with all these on the nose issues, political issues that these characters are going through, and then we have constantly Jon Snow coming back and saying, wait, don't forget, there's a bigger threat.
Not only saying that, but they even, if you guys don't mind me putting this in, I believe it was season 5 or 6, there was a particular moment where Jon Snow was escaping from the White Walkers, and he had rose an entire army up to fight them.
Right.
And it was like that shot alone, dead silent. They were out in the snow, and just seeing the walkers come up and Jon Snow just barely escaping through a little canoe, it was just like, whoa. So this threat's getting closer and closer. Not only that, but they look to be more powerful than ever.
Another thing, by putting it in the cold open, by putting it in the beginning like that, right before that incredible opening title sequence, you can ignore the White Walkers for 4 episodes right now if you want.
Yeah,
and if the moment you go back to them, the audience will know, all right, this is important. Because you put him in the very beginning. You had to put him in the beginning.
Right.
And then they would end the seasons with the White Walker threat approaching for the first couple, and then as the dragons, spoiler alert, hatch and get bigger, then they start ending the season showing the dragons. But
Right.
it's great putting it in the opening scene like that.
It's just a little seed. It's just let's wet your whistle with this, and then
it's creating story arcs. You know, like they made multiple story arcs, and they just made the White Walkers one that just transcends the entire series and becomes a growing threat throughout the entire time.
It's so under the radar. It's so under the radar.
It's under the radar, but it's like a rising tension almost. You know, so that way that when it's truly when things get down to it, it's much more impactful. The reaction is much more visceral that way. It is for me, at least, when I was watching it, because they really made you feel as though the White Walkers are a threat that could destroy everything.
And I think that's what I'm saying. When you introduced the wildlings have never done something like this, we're automatically, okay, so the wildlings are bad guys. And then a greater, like they put a threat in our face, and then seconds later, a greater threat on top of that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It took me, I loved the very first episode, but it took me a while because, at least to me, I like when action ramps up from the very beginning. You know, get me started. Let's see what's going down. You know, so it took me a couple episodes to get in, but when you're in there, you're in there.
Yeah, it took me some time. It's just like a bag of tea. You just got to let it steep. And I was not into this flavor for a while, and I just had to. I don't know why. Because the dialogue's fine. The cinematography's great. I don't need a ton of action, but for some reason, it just took me time to get there. And by episode 4 or 5 of season 1 was when I was like, I think I was really invested in the characters' journeys. I think at that point, I think I was, because I got to know them. I got to know the characters, and it's a big story with big history and big mythology, and they have to take the time to explain it to a lay audience, and maybe that's why. But once I finally understood the characters, what they were going for, I was like, okay, I'm on board with you. You know, in a 2-hour film, for example, you have to do that in the first 10 pages. You know, you got to get the audience on board with this protagonist, and you have a little more time with the series to do that. And I think maybe that's just why for me.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how many episodes before I really was like, okay, this is going to be something really special. But I think by the time they got down to King's Landing and sort of illuminated the rest of the board, and you got to see Varys and Littlefinger and this whole nother location, and everything started to go sort of south, and you realize that
Literally.
Jamie and Ed are going to become really, significant rivals, and they eventually have a little confrontation, and then it kind of hits the fan after a couple of episodes. You're like, whoa, something really
It picks
really
up pretty
bad is going
quick.
to happen.
It picks up pretty quick. I'm not gonna lie to you. When I first saw this, my expectation was a little different than it actually was. I expected something. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was a big anime watcher, so I expected people to get slashed in half or something like that.
They do.
They do. And here's the thing: when that happened, I was just crazy for it. But I expected some crazy supernatural stuff to happen, and it didn't. But with what they have, I think that they really, really pushed the bar up in terms of TV show cinematography, set design, all those elements. I think were done in a way that was just cinematic each and every single episode.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big later on in the first season. There's a fight for Tyrion's life.
Yeah.
In the Eyrie, moon door, and that's one of the scenes in the show that's like, whoa.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Shit can get real in 2 seconds.
Yeah, I distinctly remember a moment when I realized I was really in for a treat. It's I think it maybe episode 3 or something, but Jamie is talking to his dad for the first time, and you see his dad butchering a stag. And the whole time he's talking about taking over the kingdom, and he's filleting this stag, and I was like, well, if that's not foreshadow, I don't know what is. Exactly. And at that moment, I was like, okay, I think I'm good.
Yeah, and he says, Charles Dance. I mean, talk about an actor with gravitas.
Yeah.
He says we could build a dynasty that could last. He says dynasty instead of dynasty.
Yeah.
That could last 1,000 years, or we could crumble and become nothing. And by then, you hate the Lannisters.
Yes.
And you're like, I want to watch them become nothing. I want to watch them all get killed.
Yeah.
You just despise the Lannisters at that point. But that's another good point.
Right.
Another incredible character.
But you believe them at that when he's butchering this stag and he says that, you're like, oh, they're really gonna do this. They really can do this.
And Jamie's like, I could care less what people think of me. And Charles Dance is like, and Tywin's like, no, that's what you want people to think about you. The writing is so incredible.
Yeah.
They have a lot of attention to style and character. Again, I feel like this entire series is focused on the character. So everything that people do says something about them, and I think everything almost foreshadows something else. So if you pay attention, you can learn a lot about a character just from what they say.
Do you guys think that some of the characters are a bit on the nose?